Hello and welcome to Cooking the Books with Heather. Today we're going to be working from the Outlander Kitchen Cookbook and we are going to be making Fraser strawberry jam. I've made strawberry jam before on my channel and I'll link that up here, but for that I used pectin, which is a very modern way to make jam, right? But for this, instead of pectin, she uses apples which have natural pectin in it. So it's going to be sort of an apple strawberry jam, but the apples are mainly for the pectin. The first thing we need to do is sterilize our jars. Now, I don't have an actual canner. I really should have bought one at some point. I have a big pot. I meant to buy a rack that will hold the jars to go in it, but I have to measure it and it's in the garage and all that's just not happening. But I can do 1/2 pint jars of jam in here, and that is what she suggests you make. I use my pasta pot. It's sort of just barely big enough as far as the water coming up. I can do about 7 at a time, so we're gonna have to can 2 batches here. That'll be okay, that'll be okay. But the first thing we need to do is put this on the stove, bring this to a boil, and boil it for 10 minutes. That will sterilize them. Then we're going to turn the heat off, put the lid on just to keep them hot while we finish making the jam. I'm gonna get that started because that's gonna take a while. In this pan, I have the lids, which are these, the round flat things that go on top, and then you screw the rings onto the jars. These have to be new. So if you have jars you keep, the rings, they can be reused. These, if you are canning them, need to be new. They have something on this part that sort of melts as you boil it, as you process it, to help keep that seal, so that it does the nice poppy thing and you can tell that it's actually canned correctly. We'll talk about that later. But these you don't want to boil for very long, and because you don't want to melt that stuff. So these, in a separate pan covered with water, we're going to bring these to a boil and immediately turn it off and cover it, and they'll be ready for us to use when we're done. Do that too. I'll get that going once the other ones are boiling because my stove won't do that on the same zone at the same time. So that's okay. And then I want to talk about the other ingredients. There's not a lot, honestly. Strawberries. This measures them by the pound instead of by the cup. So that's what we did here. And they are either halved or quartered depending on the size, but I did cut all of them even if they were kind of small, just to give it a little bit of the inside sort of where it's cut releases the juice and all that a little bit better than the outside does. So I did make sure to cut all of them and obviously take off the green hull. So you want them hulled, washed, rinse them with cold water pretty well, hulled, and then quartered or halved depending on the size. So those are there. And these apples, these are Granny Smith apples. I've already cut up most of them. These were also measured by weight. It was about 2 parts strawberry to 1 part apples. So that's the measurements here. I'm not going to give you full measurements, obviously, but that's the ratio she's using here. And these are supposed to be peeled, quartered, and cut into 1/2 inch or smaller pieces, I think she says, into smaller than 1/2 inch pieces. So that is what I have done with most of them, but I thought I would show you the way I do it. It's not fast, but I feel good about it. So it gives me some nice cubes. So there we go. We got a lot of trash there, but that's all right. Cut them in half, cut them in quarters, and then on an angle to get out as much of the core as you can. And then I kind of set it up so it's where it's quartered and then cut it into less than 1/2 inch pieces this way, and then do the same thing on the other long side, less than 1/2 inch pieces that way. It's usually 3 or 4, sometimes 5 slices, and then that's how we get the cubes the last way. And I'm just putting them into the very large pot. We needed, she says, an 8-quart or larger pot for this. And so I don't know, I think that's 8-quart. I know it's at least 8-quart, but I didn't check the bottom to see, make sure exactly how big it was, but it's the biggest one I have that is not absolutely ginormous. So, and these, if you cut them too early, they will get a little bit brown, as you may be able to see. But that doesn't matter so much here because we are cooking them. So that's it for, a little seed there, for our apples and our strawberries. And it smells so good. It smells like strawberries. The only other ingredient we have besides a lot of sugar, which I have already measured, but you do not put this in here just yet. I've made that mistake once before. My jam didn't set up. So pay attention to the instructions and maybe that won't happen to you. The pectin is what helps the jam set up. So I've got some fresh lemon juice and I'm just gonna strain it through here because I know that I had a couple of seeds that I don't want in there. We're gonna stir all this up. Just to sort of get it mixed before we go to the stove. And right now it feels like there's not enough juice in here. It's not gonna cook, but it will. I'm sure it will. Those strawberries, once they start getting warm, will let off a lot of juice. And then when the sugar goes in, it'll be even juicier. Right, so here we have just fruit and lemon juice. And for this, we're going to bring it to a full boil over medium heat and stir it constantly. This is not something that you can go away from and let it just go. And then we're going to stir it. Then we're going to add the sugar, and then we're going to stir it until it gets to 212 degrees. So I'll talk about that again when we move over to the stove. Just because that's a lot of work for my stove to do, I'm going to go ahead and get the lids and rings boiled before I put this on, and have a timer now for my jars. I'm gonna move everything over to the stove. Okay, so my jars boiled for 10 minutes and I put the lid on it, turned it off, so they're nice and sterilized and ready for the jam. Our jam has started over here. It's on medium heat and we're waiting for it to come to a boil. So this is gonna take a little while. We're supposed to stir it constantly. Just make sure it doesn't scorch or burn. So that's what I'll be doing here for quite a while. I do want to say, even if you have brand new jars, you want to make sure you wash them before you do all this. They don't have to be dry. You can put them in the dishwasher, that's fine. But you want to make sure you wash them before you do this, just in case, you know, they might have stuff on it from the factory. And there are some tools that I have that make it a little bit easier. A canning funnel is great. It makes you get less stuff on the top of the jar when you put it into the jar. So if you have to wipe that off if you get stuff on the top of the jar, otherwise it won't seal properly. So this helps with that, and it helps not make quite as much of a mess. These also have been cleaned. So I've got just some tongs here. I use that mostly for like the rings and things. This is a magnetic lifter. It helps a lot with the lids because you can just put it in the hot water and then come up with a lid. And this is good to help transfer the jars if you need it. If they're really hot, you can pick them up like that. So I don't always use all of it, but we'll see how it goes today. I need to wash this one. This is the one I do use more often. You can put it in and grab a jar from around the lid, around the top rim, and pull it up out of the hot water. We'll need to wash this one and get it ready, make sure it's clean. This one I do use pretty much all the time. I'm getting a little impatient because I do that. I'm going to turn the heat up a little bit to try and get this to boil a little bit faster because I think we've been working on this for like half an hour, more than half an hour. Let's look. Okay. Turned it up to medium high, and now I think we're going to get our full boil. Leave it alone so it does boil for just a minute. I think I'm going to call that a full boil. It's definitely higher than a simmer. I think it'll be fine. And now we add a lot of sugar. A lot. And we need to stir this in till it's all dissolved. And now we're going to keep this at a gentle, somewhat gentle boil until it hits 212 degrees on my instant read thermometer. Now, if you use a candy thermometer and have luck with that, this is the time to pull that out. I have never had much luck with that, but I do love my instant read thermometer. So she says it'll take 15 to 25 minutes at this stage. So we'll see. I'm gonna let it come back up to a full boil and sort of take it down just a little bit if it boils too hard. And we only need to stir this occasionally, well, frequently, but not constantly at this point. So it took about 5 minutes to even start boiling again after I put the sugar in. So I'm going to turn this off. Actually, I'm going to keep it on low because we want to keep this warm. And I'm going to have to do 2 batches of all of this. So yeah, it's definitely above 212. So cool. So now I have to deal with the jars. So because it needs more water to cover when they're empty, I'm gonna have to take some of my water out, so I have a Pyrex container that I can use for that. I'm gonna go ahead and take out these jars. Make sure I get as much water out as I can. So I normally would do this all like at once, but I'm gonna do one here where you guys can see me a little bit better. So I'm gonna put my canning funnel in here. I'm gonna take it off. Sorry. Give it a stir just to make sure we're good here. Now that foam is normal, and some people will tell you to scoop it off. I don't particularly care. It's up to you. I'm going to use a ladle. We want to ladle it in here until you have about a 1/4 inch, she says, of space at the top between the rim. There we go. So in mine, I need it to come above where the funnel goes in but not too far above. So I think we've got about a 1/2 inch there, which will be fine. And then you get a lid. Put that on top. And then a ring. Put that on top. And if I'd gotten any jam on the top of the glass, I would have wiped it off with a damp paper towel, but I did not. So now this is still really hot. I'm gonna move this back over here, and I'm gonna do probably 6, because I think with them all filled, I can fit 6. So I'm gonna go ahead and do the other 5 over here. I'm gonna take out as much of this as I can, because I know I will need to have a lot out. This is just, normally I would just do it all at once, but I'm gonna do this over here where you guys probably can't see me. These are back on this, keep it warm for my next batch. So, got a little strawberry action there. And just wipe the rest off just in case. There we go. So that's done. Now, going to put these back into here. My canner. And that is just about right. So now I'm going to bring this up to a boil as quickly as I can. And after it comes to a boil, they boil for 5 minutes. So boil these for 5 minutes. That's called the processing time. You will see bubbles coming out. That's sort of the air that's in the jars being pushed out, creating sort of a vacuum in there. And then the rings, not the rings, the lids with the ring of sort of thing, something that dissolves a little bit, that softens in the boiling water, will help seal that. So after these boil for 5 minutes, you just take them right out and it'll be all done. You just let them sit at room temperature, and you should hear it pop as the vacuum sort of pulls the lid in. They those lids have a little give, and you will hear it pop as it seals. So, and then it's done, and I will have to do another batch of jars and everything. I'll do just the same thing. I'm just going to leave my jam here on low so it stays hot, so it doesn't start growing anything, because you want everything to be hot when you start to process it. So that's pretty much it for our jam. We'll let you know what we think of it in just a minute. On this episode of Cooking the Books with Heather, you watched me make Fraser strawberry jam from Teresa Carle-Sanders' Outlander Kitchen Cookbook. And I had a problem with this recipe. In it, she says to cook the jam on the stovetop until it gets to 212 degrees Fahrenheit. And I did that for my first batch, and I was really concerned because I felt like it happened way too quickly and it didn't look great. And when I put it in the jars, all of the fruit floated to the top, all of the bits of fruit floated to the top, and that's not what's supposed to happen. Luckily, I've made jam before. I did go ahead and process those jars, and this is what you see here. And This is the next day, and it is not jam. It is very liquid, and there's no way I could serve this as a jam. So I did a little research on the internet, quick Google search about like what temperature strawberry jam needs to be, and it says 220 degrees Fahrenheit. So I took the other half of my batch. So I did about 6 of these, and they're all like this, but I cooked the other half of my batch longer, and it might have been the whole 15 to 25 minutes total after boiling that she says, but the 212 degrees did not work for me, and I do not think that's right. Everything on the internet says 220 degrees. And when I did that, almost had a mess there. When I did that, you can see the fruit is more evenly distributed. It looks way more like what's in the book. And while it is a little runny here, it's a lot less runny, and out of the refrigerator, it was fine. And she says this is a compote style jam. And yeah, it may be a little looser than the jam that I make with pectin, even at 220 degrees. I probably could have cooked it a little bit longer and it would have gotten a little bit more set at room temperature, but from the refrigerator, it's fine. So just FYI, 212 will not work. Well, didn't work for me. I doubt it'll work for you. I am not at a high altitude. I don't know if temperatures, I think that's just timing. I don't know. I don't know how high altitude baking or cooking works so much, because I've never really cooked at a much higher altitude. We're basically just a little bit above sea level where I live. So, and I've lived here pretty much all my life. So I would suggest 220 degrees, and an instant read thermometer is great. However, if you don't have it, you can put a plate in the refrigerator or the freezer, drip a little bit of your jam on there, and it should not, let it cool down, and it should not be super liquidy. It was a little tiny bit liquidy once it was all cool here, but not flowing all over the plate like it was here. So I'm really glad that I corrected the mistake for half of my my jam, but now I'm gonna have to empty this into a pot, re-cook it until it's 220, wash these, use new lids because these have been sealed, and reprocess them just like I did the first batch. So everything else is exactly the same, but you cannot reuse this lid. It has the potential not to seal correctly if you do. So you can buy these really cheaply, just the lids and not the bands. Probably Walmart, Target, any place like that should have them. Any place that has canning jars usually has those. Luckily, I have some. So that's going to be another day. These are still perfectly safe because they have been canned. It's the same ingredients, it's just a little bit too thin. We just wouldn't want to use it. It's perfectly safe though. You just have to rewash and redo everything after you open it. After I filled the other 6 jars, I had a little bit left over, so that's what we've been eating on. I just put it in another jar and put it directly in the refrigerator. You can see it's a little loose, but you know, it's perfectly fine. The jam does not taste much like apples. It tastes like strawberry jam. You do get a little bit of the apple texture in it, but there are none of the usual apple spices, so don't think it's going to taste like apple butter or apple jelly or anything. So, but those apples, the Granny Smith apples, don't cook down, don't break up really easily like some apples. I don't know if that's because of the pectin, whatever. They're one of the apples that does not sort of fall apart when you cook them. So you do end up with apple bits. So make sure that they are of a size that you don't mind putting in your mouth. So that's why she says smaller than a 1/2 inch. So, but yeah, I enjoyed it just fine. It's probably not going to be my go-to strawberry jam recipe, but we'll have no problem, you know, finishing this up. And we go through quite a bit of strawberry jam. So if you enjoyed watching me make this, please hit the thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and come back and watch me make something else, including something with this jam in just a little bit.